Hi friends! For those of you that don't know us, my name is Beth and this is my son Pete, and Pete is a sophomore at Huntingtown High School, and we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the current election. I say current because the election has already started in certain areas of the country, and so we just wanted to share some important information. We know 2020 has been a little weird. So we just felt like it was important to get some information out there to people, just to make sure that everybody has the information that they need in order to fully participate in the voting process. So before we dive into that information, Pete's going to talk a little bit about the importance of voting.
Yes, so democracy is the basic, based upon the system of government for and by the people. The vote is the basic building block that gives people the power to control their government and sort of share their policies that they want and the future direction for their town, state, and country.
Good, yeah. And, it's important for all of us to remember that generations before us have really worked and struggled to get all of us our rights to vote. So it's really important that we don't squander that right that they worked so hard for, and that each of us does our duty as a citizen to participate in the voting process. What we're going to talk about first is, what we're actually going to be voting on in this election cycle. So we've got the general election coming up, and we're going to just open up with exactly what's going to be on our ballot. And what Pete and I are going to talk about is specifically what's on the ballot here in Calvert County. It is going to vary depending on where you live. And later on in our talk, we'll talk to you about ways where you can go and actually see what will be on your particular ballot where you live, okay? So what is going to be on the ballot here in Calvert County? I have visuals, not sure if you're going to be able to see, but we have them. So what's going to be on the ballot here in Calvert County? Voters are going to be selecting U.S. President, going to be voting on our representative for the U.S. Congress. We'll also be voting on the Circuit County Judge for Calvert County, as well as the judge for the Court of Appeals for Southern Maryland, the judge for the Court of Special Appeals, the at-large member, and also members of the Calvert County Board of Education. And there's also 2 Maryland state questions that are ballot issues that are going to be on the ballot here and all across Maryland, actually. So the 2 Maryland state questions have to do with the balanced budget for the state, as well as sports and events betting for raising money for education. So I'll just read the 2 Maryland state questions that we'll be voting on. So the first state question will be, you're going to vote either for or against the proposed amendment that authorizes the General Assembly in enacting a balanced budget bill for the fiscal year 2024 and each fiscal year thereafter, to increase, diminish, or add items, provided the General Assembly may not exceed the total proposed budget as submitted by the governor. So that's the first state question that people across Maryland will be voting on. The second is, do you approve the expansion of commercial gaming in the state of Maryland to authorize sports and events betting for the primary purpose of raising revenue for education? Okay? So that's what's going to be on the ballot here in Calvert County.
And I know that voting this year is going to be tricky due to COVID, so.
Yeah, and the reason why it's going to be a little tricky and why people have so many questions about the voting process for this particular year is because of a number of reasons that we've put up. Number one is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are less polling places for people to go and vote. So here in Calvert, we won't be using our normal number of polling locations, and they won't be in the same locations as they have been in the past. Instead, we're going to be using vote centers that have been are going to be specifically set up to keep everybody safe, as possible during COVID. So that's one change. The other change because of COVID is we are across the country. There is worry that certain polling centers aren't going to be able to staff themselves with enough polling workers. And this is because most people that volunteer to work in the polling centers and serve as election officials are senior citizens. A lot of them are in that high-risk category for COVID. And so because of their safety, they're choosing, to sit this election out as far as working the polls. And so what a lot of the local boards of elections have done, trying to reach people that aren't in those high-risk categories and trying to bring in people to work in their place. So that's another change that the year has brought to this election. Another thing that is causing a little bit of trickiness is just the fear that people have of going to vote in person. Completely understandable, especially if you're in a high-risk category. Most people primarily like to go vote in person, but because of COVID, people are having to change their plans. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the options are for everybody. There's also a fair amount of distrust kind of being floated out on certain social media sites and across certain news networks. Some disinformation is getting out there, causing a lot of distrust in the voting system. So we're here to dispel that and talk to you a little bit about how you can navigate the process to make sure your vote is counted safely. And the last item is just the confusion with all the changes that everybody's seeing as far as how to vote this year. So that's the information that we're going to be providing now. So Pete, what is the best way to make sure that your voice is heard and your vote is counted?
So having a voting plan.
Yes.
So you should make one now. A great resource for this is like the website www.vote411.com. Here you can enter like your name and your address. It will give you accurate information on 1, how to register to vote, 2, how to check your registration status, 3, find what is on your ballot, 4, when, where, and how to cast your vote, and 5, discovering any upcoming debates in your area.
Yeah, I love Vote 411, and it's 411.org if you're looking. But even if you just Google search Vote 411, it'll pull up the site. It is super user-friendly, really easy to use. When you pull up Vote 411, the main page is just going to ask for you to put in your street address, your city, state, and zip code, and it will bring up a screen that's going to tell you everything that you're going to need to know, some really good information for what you're going to need to know to set up your voting plan. One of the things that I really enjoy about this is the first election that I've actually used this website, is you can actually look to see what's on your ballot. That's how I had gotten the information that I just shared with you. And the thing that's really nice is you can go to each line of items that you're going to be seeing on the ballot, and say for the local Board of Education election that we're going to have, you can see all of the people that are running for the Board of Election, and you can click on each candidate and you can see where they stand on certain issues. So if you don't know much about the people that are on your ballot that are running for certain positions, you can just use this as a tool to do really good side-by-side comparisons so that you're making the most educated vote that you can, and that's important, okay? Also, one thing, looking for information on how to register, it's going to give you, once you put in your personal information, it will tell you registration information and deadlines for where you live. Here in Calvert County, the deadline for applying for voter registration is going to be Tuesday, October 13th. So that's coming up. If you haven't yet registered to vote, you have until October 13th to do so either by mail or online. Now, know if you, for some reason, miss that deadline, if you show up at either the early voting center or at your voting center on election day, you can register right there on the spot. Don't think that come, election time, if you haven't registered, that you will not be able to do that. You can do that at the voting center when you show up to vote if you choose to go vote in person. Okay, so that's important to know.
So let's talk about the different ways to vote.
Yeah, so there are 3 different ways for you to cast your vote. Why don't you tell everybody about the first option?
Yes, so number 1 is early in-person voting. So Calvert County has one early voting center, the lower level conference room in the Community Services Building, located at 30 Duke Street in Prince Frederick. Dates for early voting will be from Monday, October 26th through Monday, November 2nd. That being with including a Saturday and Sunday. Voting hours are from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. for each day of early voting. It is strongly recommended that if you're able and comfortable with in-person voting, that you take advantage of early voting just so you are able to avoid or prevent potentially long lines on election day.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because of the fact that there are going to be a lot less places to go to vote in person, they're really stressing if you're at all able to take advantage of early voting, if you're going to be going to vote in person, try to do it during the early voting period, just to avoid those long lines that are likely on election day. Okay, so that voting early in person is one option. Another option that a lot of people are utilizing this year, which is new to a lot of folks that are used to voting in person, is using a mail-in ballot. Now, mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, they're the exact same thing, okay? So here in Maryland, Maryland offers mail-in balloting to any eligible registered voter, including overseas and military voters. So in order to vote by mail here in Maryland, you must apply to do so before every election cycle. So just because you have applied to receive a mail-in ballot for this particular election, don't assume that you're going to get sent one for each election. You're going to need to reapply for a mail-in ballot before each election cycle. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So to obtain a mail-in ballot, you can visit the Maryland State Board of Elections official website and download and complete the 2020 Vote by Mail-in application. And in order to do this, you will need to have a Maryland driver's license or an MVA issued ID card. Okay, that requirement is going to be for you to obtain the mail-in ballot. Okay, so in order to obtain a mail-in ballot, it's important that you know that there is a deadline coming up for that as well. So to request a mail-in ballot, the deadline for that is Tuesday, October 20th. And that's whether or not you requested through email or if you download and print it off and want to mail it in, you need to know that that needs to be at the election board by October 20th. It can't just be postmarked, okay? We just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. It's strongly recommended to complete your mail-in ballot as soon as possible, just to ensure, especially if you're actually going to be putting it in the mail, just to ensure that the post office has enough time for it to get to the election board in time. Okay, when you get it, it's going to look something like this. You'll get an official ballot from the Board of Elections where you live, and if you turn it around, on the back side of ours, it gives you some information for returning the ballot. So it gives you some options. How to return your ballot. You can do so via a drop box. So those secure drop boxes that are available in your area. So you can drop off your ballot at a secure drop box. You can also vote by mail. So mail your ballot so it's postmarked on or before Election Day. It has to be postmarked on or before Election Day. The post office recommends mailing your ballot as soon as possible to make sure it arrives on time. You can also take your mail-in ballot to one of the polling centers. You can drop off your ballot at the voting location. You just walk in and you hand it to an election official, and they'll make sure that it gets put with the other ballots and counted, okay? One really neat thing is when you receive your mail-in ballot, it will give you a link where you can actually track your ballot. So you'll know where it is on its little journey to the election board. So, you know, if you're worried about where it is, if it's going to get there in time, there is a method for you to track your individual ballot. If it gets to be like you've dropped it in the mail a few weeks in advance and you're tracking it and you still don't see that they've received it, if you're worried at all, you can walk into a voting center and explain the situation. You can request a provisional ballot that they will give you. So the provisional ballot that you can complete there in person will be counted as long as they haven't received your mail-in ballot. So they're tracking your ballot just like you are, so you won't be voting twice. It's just an assurance that if something happens, your ballot does get lost in the mail, you have a way to check it. And then if you're worried and it's close and you still don't see that it's been received, just know that you can go and vote in person and use a provisional ballot. Okay, they'll help you out. All right, so one last thing with the mail-in ballots is be really careful when you're filling it out. My husband got his the other day, and when he opened it up, I mean, he had some questions about, you know, do I need to, you know, just looking at it the first time, it was a little confusing. Do I need to provide like a copy of my driver's license when I send it in? It really wasn't clear reading through it that first time. So give yourself some time, read it once, twice, 3 times. Make sure that you're really paying attention to some of the specifics. On our ballot, you can only use black ink. You can only fully bubble in your choices. You can't make any extra marks on the ballot. You can only sign where they tell you to sign. If you have any extra markings on your ballot, it won't be counted. So do be really careful when you're filling it out, because we want your vote to count, okay? So that part's important. So there is one more way of voting that we haven't talked about, and you're going to take that one.
This is one of the important ones, voting in person on Election Day. So for the 2020 general election on Tuesday, November 3rd in Calvert County, we'll be using vote centers, of course, instead of usual polling places. There will be 5 voting centers or vote centers open on Election Day, and will include the 4 local high schools, so Patuxent, Huntingtown, Northern, and I think one more, which Calvert. And then the Community Resources Building located on 30 Duke Street in Prince Frederick. Already talked about that. Any, like a Calvert County resident may use any of these like vote centers that is most convenient to them. So
yeah, so that's one thing that's going to be a little different for folks. In normal times, you have a specific polling site that you go to vote. Just again, those regular polling sites aren't going to be where you're going to go. You're going to be going to one of the 5 sites that Pete just listed. And that the one nice thing about this go around is with those 5 voting sites that are going to be open on Election Day here in Calvert, you can go to any of the 5, the one that's the most convenient for you. So just knowing that might make it a little bit easier if you are in fact going to go and vote in person that day. Okay, so we know that's a lot of information, but with so much confusion out there, we really hope that we were able to help. And is there anything else that you want to say to everybody before we leave?
Yeah, I just really hope that this video just cleared up so many issues that you had. Like, I know that like our family had trouble looking at certain ways to vote the first time around, but one last thing, please make your voting plan and make sure that you vote. It's so much helpful, and it will help this election. A lot of people say that like presidential elections, that they're the most important, that they're always changing, but this one is probably the most important because
and this is the first one that you've really been old enough to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So I'm going to echo what Pete said. It's very important, no matter which way you want to vote, that you make your voice heard. So we thank you so much for spending your time with us, and share this information if you feel like it would help someone you know. And all right, so enjoy the rest of your day, night, whenever you happen to be watching this, and take care.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye.